Hello, everyone. This is Ian Pierce with Catholic Laity TV. It's going to be the first video as part of my channel here. I'm going to try and do weekly liturgical readings, doing reading one, reading two, any extra readings, well, the gospel in some instance. It's going to be coming directly from a workbook for lectors, gospel readers, and proclaimers of the word book. This is so that I don't misinterpret anything or say anything that would be outside of the Catholic Church's teaching. I don't want to be labeled a heretic. So I'm going to go from these explanations and I'll read through them. Eventually, I'd like to get moving into different Catholic news and whatnot throughout the week as this gets going. It's just kind of a hobby for me right now. I get some of my downtime being a little productive here. So now I'm going to start with Holy Thursday, being that it's April 5th today, Wednesday, April 5th today. That would mean that tomorrow is Holy Thursday, the beginning of the weekend of our holy days, leading into Easter on Sunday. So we're going to be starting with reading one. It's from Exodus 12, verse 1 through 8 and 11 through 14. It's a reading from the book of Exodus. Let me go ahead and share the screen so you all can see the reading. A reading from the book of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall stand at the head of your calendar. You shall reckon it the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel. On the 10th of this month, every one of your families must procure for itself a lamb, one apiece for each household. If a family is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join the nearest household in procuring one and shall share in the lamb, in proportion to the number of persons who partake of it. The lamb must be a year-old male and without blemish. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, and then, with the whole assembly of Israel present, it shall be slaughtered during the evening twilight. They shall take some of its blood and apply it to the two doorposts and the lintel of every house in which they partake of the lamb. That same night they shall eat its roasted flesh with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. This is how you are to eat it. With your loins girt, sandals on your feet, and your staff in hand, you shall eat like those who are in flight. It is the Passover of the Lord. For on this same night I will go through Egypt, striking down every firstborn of the land, both man and beast, and executing judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. But the blood will mark the houses where you are. Seeing the blood, I will pass over you. Thus, when I strike the land of Egypt, no destructive blow will come upon you. This day shall be a memorial feast for you, which all your generations shall celebrate with pilgrimage to the Lord as a perpetual institution." The word of the Lord. So from this point forward, it goes on with a responsorial psalm, 116 verses 12 through 13, 15 through 16 BC, and 17 through 18. Psalms listed. I'm not gonna read any of the psalms. I'm gonna go right into the second reading now. This is a second reading. It's gonna be a reading from the first letter of Saint Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, I received from the Lord what I also handed to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night he was handed over, took bread, and after he had given thanks, broke it and said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way also the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this, as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord until he comes." It's the word of the Lord. Now we're going to be moving here into the gospel reading. Just a disclaimer, I am no priest. Later on, I am going to read the explanation of the gospel. This is by no means my interpretation. This is a straight out of the book, and it's a great explanation. So Here, I'll start with the gospel reading. So the gospel, it's John 13, verse 1 through 15. It's a reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So, during supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper and took off his outer garments. He took a towel and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew he would betray him. For the reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do. The Gospel of the Lord. So I'm going to start with reading 1. I'll do the explanation for reading 1, jump into the explanation for reading 2, and then I'll finish up with the explanation of the Gospel. Starting with reading 1. So Holy Thursday is also called Maundy Thursday. It's a commemoration of the Synoptic Gospel story of the Passover meal that Jesus shared with his disciples before his death in a celebration of the institution of the Eucharist. Today's readings speak well to the robust, multi-layered meanings attached to this feast. In the first reading, we hear an account of the Passover ritual as explained in the book of Exodus. It appears immediately after the announcement of the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn of Egypt, and immediately before the execution of this 10th plague. However, the ritual itself probably reflects a later period of development. In this case, a time when two separate rituals had been joined into one. The first is the ritual of the Passover lamb, and the second is the ritual of the unleavened bread. Here, God is speaking to Moses, who will later describe the rituals to the Israelite peoples. The ritual of the Passover lamb always occurred in the springtime and was connected to the 10th plague by the directive to the Israelites to put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts and lintels of the homes where they were eating the sacrificial meal, so that God would know to pass over those places and protect them from the destruction that would come upon Egypt when God killed all of the firstborn. Although it is troubling for us to think about God doing such a terrible thing, we need to remember that the plagues were God's weapons in the battle with the hard-hearted Pharaoh, who claimed divinity but was not really a god. Thus, Passover is a joyous, anticipatory celebration of freedom from slavery, which God will surely and immediately win for the Israelites. Moving into reading 2 now. Our second reading from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians is part of a longer teaching on how to share the Eucharist with integrity and attention to the welfare of the entire community. In the early centuries of Christianity, the Eucharist took place as part of a common meal in the homes of wealthy patrons. But someone, perhaps Chloe's people, told Paul about the community's bad behavior when they gathered to eat the Lord's Supper. Apparently, the wealthy arrived early and were eating and drinking to excess so that when the poor arrived, the food was gone. Not only were the lower class members of the community hungry, but they were shamed by the fact that the wealthy had no regard for their need. Paul is being extremely radical here. When the Christian community gathered for Eucharist, they were doing exactly what everyone else was doing at banquets, in keeping with cultural practices in the first century Mediterranean world. But Paul is fierce in his condemnation of the community's behavior, arguing that anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. Why? Paul recites the words of the institution of the Eucharist that was already in use in Christian communities, tracing them back to the authority of Jesus. Biblical scholars think that Paul might have altered the original wording by adding, "Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me," to the statement, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood," thereby highlighting the Eucharist as a commemoration of a supreme act of love, Jesus' death on a cross. The community should do likewise, no matter how radical it might seem. They should love even those who were different from themselves. Now we're moving on to the explanation of the gospel. At first glance, today's reading from the Gospel of John might seem like a strange choice for Holy Thursday. John's story of Jesus' last meal with his disciples is not a Passover meal. Rather, it takes place several days before Passover because in John's Gospel, Jesus is sentenced to death and crucified on the preparation day for Passover, when the Passover lambs are being sacrificed in the temple. Also, the story begins on an ominous note by explaining that Jesus' hour, that is, the time of his death and return to the Father, had come, and that he had loved his own to the end or to the fullest. These verbs are aorist tense, which denotes a past action completed. The narrator also notes that Judas had already plotted to hand Jesus over to his enemies. Today's reading describes a ritual of hospitality, the washing of feet, that would have preceded any banquet in the first century Mediterranean world. This was a fitting way to indicate to your guests a sense of welcome. However, this work would have been done not by the master of the household or the host of a dinner, but by the master's slaves. Hence, we can sense Peter's horror as he watches Jesus remove his outer garment in preparation for work and engage in slaves' tasks to provide hospitality to his guests. But this foot washing is so much more than an act of hospitality. When Peter protests that he wants no part in Jesus' self-shaming act, Jesus tells Peter that if he refuses, he can have no part in what Jesus has in store for the disciples. Peter's response is somewhat humorous because he takes Jesus' words literally and requests a full bath. John frequently uses this literary technique of having characters understand only the plain meaning of Jesus' words so that Jesus can go on to explain the deeper meaning. Thus, Jesus responds, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." The phrase, "but not all," refers to Judas. Biblical scholars have debated whether bathing is a reference to baptism. The Greek word is lo, meaning to bathe or to wash, which can be applied in a variety of settings. At the very least, we can say that bathing is a symbol of abiding or remaining with Jesus. Abiding is the way the gospel refers to discipleship. Now, only the feet need to be washed. Why? The foot washing is an action and symbol of the extent to which the disciples must go to be servants of one another. They must follow Jesus' example of servanthood and loving others to the end. And what about us? Are we willing to follow Jesus' example? For the author of John's Gospel, responding to the call of discipleship is more than pious thoughts. It requires that we be humble servants of all God's children. Thank you for listening. I'm going to try and keep up with these as best as I can. Like I said, this is a hobby. I'm going to be coming back here. It's going to be probably the next few days I'll be making them for the Holy Weekend here. And then feel free to comment in the section here. Have any discussions about the gospel, any other religious news or tidings, anything like that. I look forward to making more videos, and please hit that subscribe button if you have not. Thank you.